The dust never settled in Silver Creek, a frontier town that had sprung up around the railroad like a wildflower after rain. On this particular evening in 1887, the autumn wind carried the sounds of laughter and music from the makeshift circus that had rolled into town 3 days prior. Oil lamps flickered against the darkening sky, casting dancing shadows on the faces of townsfolk who had gathered to escape the monotony of their hard-earned lives. Inside the main tent, constructed from weathered canvas and hope, Isabella Martinez moved with the grace of water flowing over stones. Her bare feet found rhythm on the wooden platform that served as a stage, her flowing skirt spinning like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind. The accordion wheezed its melancholy tune while she danced, her dark hair catching the amber light of the lanterns hung around the tent's perimeter. "Ladies and gentlemen," called out Senor Rodriguez, the circus owner, his voice carrying over the murmur of the crowd, "witness the enchanting Isabella, the desert rose who dances with the spirits of the wind." Isabella had heard these words 1,000 times in a dozen different towns, but tonight felt different. As she spun, her eyes caught sight of a figure sitting alone in the back row, partially hidden in shadow. Unlike the other men who whistled and called out, this one sat perfectly still, his weathered cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. His clothes were simple, worn leather boots, faded denim pants, and a cotton shirt that had seen better days. But there was something in the way he watched her that made her heart skip an extra beat. When the music ended and the crowd erupted in applause, Isabella took her bow, but her eyes sought out the mysterious cowboy. He was already standing, placing a single silver dollar on his seat before tipping his hat in her direction. As he turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of kind eyes and a gentle smile that seemed out of place in this rough frontier town. "Isabella, another magnificent performance!" exclaimed Maria, her closest friend and fellow performer, as they gathered backstage behind a curtain that separated them from the departing crowd. "Did you see how that cowboy looked at you? Like he was seeing an angel." Isabella tried to dismiss the fluttering in her stomach. "He's probably just another drifter who'll be gone with the morning sun. We've seen 100 like him." But even as she spoke the words, Isabella knew this was different. There had been something in his gaze, not the hungry stare she was accustomed to from men in the audience, but something deeper, more respectful, something that made her feel seen rather than merely observed. As the circus performers began their nightly routine of cleaning up and preparing for the next day, Isabella found herself stepping outside the tent. The cool desert air was a relief after the stuffiness inside, and the stars above seemed brighter than usual, as if the universe itself was putting on a show. "Beautiful night for dancing under the stars." Isabella turned to find the cowboy standing near the water barrels, his hat now in his hands, revealing sandy brown hair and a face that was younger than she had expected. He wasn't traditionally handsome in the way of the traveling showmen she knew, but there was an honesty in his features that drew her in. "You enjoyed the show?" she asked, suddenly conscious of her simple performance dress and the dust on her feet. "I've never seen anything quite like it," he replied, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. "You move like the music was written just for you. I'm Thomas, by the way, Thomas Mitchell." "Isabella Martinez," she said, offering a small curtsy. "Are you from Silver Creek, Mr. Mitchell?" Thomas nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "Born and raised, though I spend most of my time on the range. When I heard the circus was in town, I figured I ought to see what all the excitement was about." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'm glad I did." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of the circus winding down for the night. Isabella found herself studying his hands. They were indeed calloused from hard work, with dirt under the fingernails, exactly what she would expect from a cowboy. Yet there was something refined in the way he held himself, as if he had been taught proper manners somewhere along the way. "Will you be staying long in Silver Creek?" Thomas asked. "Another 3 days," Isabella replied. Then we move on to Millbrook. And after that, she shrugged, wherever the wind takes us. That sounds like a lonely life. It can be, Isabella admitted, surprised by her own honesty. But it's the only life I've known. My parents died when I was young, and Señor Rodriguez took me in. The circus is my family now. Thomas's expression softened. I'm sorry for your loss. Family comes in many forms, I suppose. What about you? Do you have family here in Silver Creek? Some, Thomas replied vaguely. It's complicated. Before Isabella could ask what he meant, Maria's voice called out from the tent. Isabella, Señor Rodriguez wants to speak with all of us. I should go, Isabella said, though she found herself reluctant to end their conversation. Would it be inappropriate if I came to see the show again tomorrow night? Thomas asked, and Isabella was charmed by the slight nervousness in his voice. I think that would be lovely, she replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. As she walked back toward the tent, Isabella couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. Thomas was still standing there watching her go, and when their eyes met, he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both respectful and intimate. That night, as Isabella lay on her small cot in the wagon she shared with Maria, she found sleep elusive. Instead, she stared up at the canvas roof and thought about kind eyes and a gentle smile, about the way Thomas had spoken to her as if she were a lady instead of just a circus performer. For the first time in her 23 years, Isabella Martinez found herself wondering what it would be like to have a home that didn't roll on wheels and a love that didn't have to end when the show moved on. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the wagon slightly and carrying with it the promise of change. In a few days, she would be gone from Silver Creek, but something told her that the memory of tonight and of Thomas Mitchell would stay with her long after the dust of this little frontier town had settled. The next evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything seem more vivid. Isabella found herself taking extra care with her appearance, braiding small wildflowers Maria had picked into her dark hair, and choosing her most beautiful dress, a deep red number with gold embroidery that caught the lamplight beautifully. You're glowing tonight, Maria observed with a knowing smile as they prepared backstage. Could it have anything to do with that handsome cowboy? Don't be ridiculous, Isabella replied, but she couldn't keep the smile from her lips. I'm just energized by the crowd. Maria hummed skeptically. Well, your mysterious admirer is already here. Same seat as last night, watching the entrance like a hawk watching for prey. Isabella's heart did a little dance in her chest, but she forced herself to focus on the performance ahead. When she stepped onto the platform and the music began, she moved with even more passion than usual, every gesture flowing from a place of joy she hadn't felt in years. She was dancing not just for the crowd, but for one person in particular, and the knowledge made her feel electric. Thomas was indeed in the same seat, and this time he wasn't trying to hide his attention. His eyes followed her every movement with an appreciation that went beyond mere physical attraction. When their gazes met during a particularly spirited spin, Isabella saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. He wasn't just watching a performance, he was seeing her, the real her, in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. After the show, Isabella didn't even pretend to be surprised when she found Thomas waiting by the water barrels again. This time, he held a small bouquet of desert wildflowers that looked like they had been picked with careful consideration. For the most beautiful dancer in all of the American West, he said, offering her the flowers with a shy smile. You're quite the flatterer, Mr. Mitchell, Isabella said, accepting the bouquet and breathing in their sweet scent. Though I suspect you haven't seen many dancers in these parts. More than you might think, Thomas replied. Silver Creek gets more visitors than most frontier towns. We have resources that attract travelers. Isabella was curious about what he meant, but before she could ask, Thomas extended his arm. Would you care to take a walk? I know a place where we can see the whole valley spread out below us. Against her better judgment, Senor Rodriguez had strict rules about performers fraternizing with townspeople. Isabella found herself accepting Thomas's arm. He led her away from the circus, down a winding path that climbed a small hill overlooking Silver Creek. The view from the top was breathtaking. The town spread out below them like a handful of glowing pearls scattered across dark velvet. Oil lamps twinkled in windows, and they could hear the distant sound of a piano playing in what Isabella assumed was the local saloon. "It's beautiful," she whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might break the spell of the moment. "Not half as beautiful as you," Thomas said softly, and when Isabella turned to look at him, she found his eyes already on her face, rather than the view. "You don't know me, Mr. Mitchell," Isabella said, though her protest was gentle. "I'm just a girl who dances for strangers and sleeps in a wagon, hardly the stuff of romantic poetry." "Thomas," he corrected. "And I think you underestimate yourself, Isabella. The way you move, the way you carry yourself, there's strength there, and grace, and something that can't be taught or bought. That's more valuable than anything I've ever seen." They sat down on a fallen log, and Isabella was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from Thomas's body in the cool night air. "Tell me about your life," she said. "What's it like being a cowboy in Silver Creek?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and Isabella wondered if she had asked something too personal. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "It's challenging. There are expectations, responsibilities, that sometimes feel heavier than they should. People see what they want to see, and sometimes it's easier to let them." "That sounds lonely," Isabella observed. "It can be," Thomas admitted. "Until recently, anyway." The way he looked at her when he said this made Isabella's heart flutter like a butterfly caught in a gentle breeze. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his hand. His skin was rough from outdoor work, but warm and reassuring. "I know about feeling trapped by expectations," she said. "Everyone sees the circus dancer, the exotic entertainment. They don't see the girl who wishes she had a real home sometimes, who dreams about what it would be like to wake up in the same place every morning." Thomas turned his hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. "What would you do if you could wake up anywhere in the world tomorrow morning?" Isabella considered the question seriously. I think I'd want a little house with a garden, somewhere I could plant flowers and watch them grow instead of always moving on before I could see them bloom. I'd want to learn to cook real meals instead of living on whatever we can buy or trade for in each town. And I'd want—" She paused, feeling bold. "I'd want someone to share it with. Someone kind and honest who would see me as more than just a pretty face or a way to pass time." Thomas was quiet for so long that Isabella began to worry she had revealed too much. But when she looked at him, she saw an expression of wonder on his face, as if she had just described something he had been dreaming about himself. "Isabella," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "What if I told you that everything you just described? What if I said it was possible?" Before she could respond, the sound of voices carried up from the path below them. Isabella recognized Senor Rodriguez's accent even from a distance, and panic seized her heart. "I have to go," she said, jumping to her feet. "If Senor Rodriguez finds me up here, will I see you tomorrow?" Thomas asked urgently, standing as well. "I don't know," Isabella replied honestly. "This is dangerous, Thomas, for both of us." But even as she said the words, Isabella knew she was already lost. The way Thomas had spoken about possibility, the gentleness in his touch, the respect in his voice, it was everything she had never dared to hope for. "Meet me behind the general store tomorrow after your show," Thomas said quietly. "Please. There are things I need to tell you, things I should have said already." Isabella looked into his eyes and saw something that looked almost like desperation. Against all logic, she found herself nodding. "Behind the general store," she agreed. As she hurried back down the path, Isabella's mind raced with questions. What had Thomas meant about things being possible? What did he need to tell her that was so important? And why did she feel like her entire life was about to change forever? Behind her, Thomas remained on the hill, watching until her figure disappeared into the lights of the circus below. He pulled a gold pocket watch from his vest. Not the sort of thing a simple cowboy would own, but in the darkness there was no one to see. Tomorrow night, he would have to tell Isabella the truth about who he really was. The question was whether she would still look at him the same way once she knew that the cowboy she was falling for was actually Thomas Mitchell III, owner of Silver Creek Bank and Trust, and quite possibly the wealthiest man in 3 counties. The thought of losing her before he'd even truly found her made his chest tight with fear. But Isabella deserved honesty, and if he was falling in love with her, which he increasingly suspected he was, then it had to be built on truth, not on the deception he'd been living for the past 2 nights. As Thomas made his way back down the hill, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Tomorrow night, he would tell Isabella everything, and then he would ask her to stay in Silver Creek, not as his secret, but as his future. The 3rd night arrived with an unexpected storm brewing on the horizon, and Isabella could feel the electricity in the air as she prepared for what she somehow knew would be her most important performance yet. The tent seemed more crowded than usual, with travelers taking shelter from the approaching weather, but Isabella's eyes immediately found Thomas in his usual spot, looking more serious than she had seen him before. During her dance, Isabella felt as though she was moving through a dream. Every step, every gesture seemed charged with meaning, and when she caught Thomas's eye, she saw something there that made her stomach flutter with nervous excitement. There was determination in his gaze, and something that looked almost like fear. As soon as the performance ended and Isabella had taken her bows, she slipped away from the circus as quietly as possible. The wind had picked up significantly, whipping her skirt around her legs as she made her way through the dusty streets toward the general store. The first drops of rain were beginning to fall, and Isabella pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Thomas was already waiting when she arrived, pacing nervously in the narrow alley behind the building. When he saw her, his face lit up with relief, but the anxiety remained in his eyes. "Isabella, thank you for coming," he said, taking her hands in his. "There's something I need to tell you, and I'm not sure how to begin." "Then just begin," Isabella said gently, though her heart was starting to race. "Whatever it is, Thomas, we can face it together." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing her face. "Isabella, I haven't been entirely truthful with you about who I am." A cold fear began to settle in Isabella's stomach. "What do you mean?" Thomas took a deep breath. "My name is Thomas Mitchell, that part is true. But I'm not just a cowboy, Isabella. I own the bank here in Silver Creek. The clothes I've been wearing, the way I've been presenting myself, it's not the whole truth." Isabella stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You own the bank. My family started Silver Creek Bank and Trust 20 years ago. When my father died 3 years ago, I inherited everything. I'm what you might call wealthy, Isabella. Very wealthy." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. She pulled her hands free from his grasp, taking a step backward. "Wealthy," she repeated slowly. "How wealthy?" Thomas looked uncomfortable. "I own most of the businesses in Silver Creek, plus cattle ranches, mining interests. Isabella, money isn't important to me, but I want you to know the truth because..." "Because what?" Isabella's voice was rising, and she could feel tears beginning to sting her eyes. "Because you thought it would be amusing to play dress-up with the circus girl, because you wanted to see if you could fool the ignorant dancer." "No!" Thomas said urgently, stepping toward her. "Isabella, please, it wasn't like that at all. I dress like this because I'm tired of people only seeing my money when they look at me. I wanted to be judged for who I am, not what I own. When I met you, I finally found someone who saw me. The real me. The real you." Isabella laughed bitterly, and the sound was harsh against the wind. "Who is the real you, Thomas? The cowboy who sits in the back of a circus tent, or the banker who owns half the county? Because I don't know anymore." Thunder rumbled overhead, and the rain began to fall harder. Thomas reached for his jacket, and Isabella noticed for the first time that beneath the worn exterior it was made of fine wool, far better quality than any working cowboy could afford. "You've been lying to me this entire time," Isabella said, and her voice broke on the words. "Everything, your clothes, your story, probably even your name for all I know. It's all been one big lie." "My feelings for you aren't a lie," Thomas said desperately. "Isabella, I'm falling in love with you. That's why I had to tell you the truth. I can't build something real with you based on deception." "Love?" Isabella shook her head, tears now mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "How can you talk about love when you don't even know what truth is? Do you have any idea what this feels like? I thought I had finally met someone who saw me for who I really am, someone who didn't care about my background or my circumstances. But you were just playing a game, pretending to be someone you're not, so you could have your fun with the poor circus girl." "That's not what this was," Thomas insisted. "Isabella, please, let me explain." "Explain what? That you're rich enough to buy and sell my entire world 10 times over? That while I was sharing my dreams about having a little house and a garden, you were sitting there knowing you could buy me a mansion if you wanted to?" Isabella's voice cracked with pain. "Do you know how foolish I feel right now? How small?" The storm was in full force now, soaking them both, but neither seemed to notice. Thomas looked desperate, his careful composure cracking. "I never wanted you to feel small. You're the most magnificent person I've ever met, Isabella. Your strength, your grace, your kindness, those things have nothing to do with money or social position. But everything to do with honesty," Isabella shot back, "which apparently means nothing to you." "It means everything to me," Thomas said. "That's why I'm telling you now. Isabella, I want to ask you to stay in Silver Creek. I want to court you properly, honestly. I want to build a life with you." Isabella stared at him through the rain, and for a moment Thomas thought he saw hope flicker in her eyes. But then her expression hardened again. "Stay in Silver Creek as what? Your curiosity, your charitable project, the exotic dancer you rescued from the circus?" She shook her head. "I may not have money, Thomas, but I have pride. I won't be any man's pity case or entertainment." "You wouldn't be—" Thomas started, but Isabella held up her hand. "I need to think," she said quietly. This is too much. I need time to understand what's real and what isn't." Thomas watched helplessly as Isabella turned and began walking back toward the circus. "Isabella, wait!" he called after her. "Please don't let this end everything between us." But Isabella didn't turn around. She walked away through the rain, her figure growing smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed her completely, leaving Thomas standing alone in the storm, wondering if he had just lost the only real thing that had ever happened to him. Back at the circus, Isabella slipped into the wagon she shared with Maria, hoping to avoid questions. But Maria was waiting for her, wrapped in a blanket and looking worried. "Isabella, you're soaked through. Where have you been?" Isabella sank onto her cot, still in her wet clothes, and finally let the tears come freely. Between sobs, she told Maria everything. About Thomas, about the lies, about the revelation that had shattered her newfound happiness like glass hitting stone. "Oh, mi amor," Maria said softly, wrapping Isabella in a dry blanket and holding her close. "I'm so sorry. I feel like such a fool, Maria. I actually thought I let myself believe that maybe I could have something real, something lasting, but it was all built on lies." Maria stroked Isabella's wet hair. "Maybe he was lying about who he was. But were his feelings for you a lie? The way he looked at you, Isabella, that didn't seem false to me." "How can I know what's real when everything else was an act?" Isabella whispered. "He's one of the richest men in the territory, and I'm nobody. A circus dancer with no family, no prospects, nothing to offer someone like him." "You're not nobody," Maria said firmly. "You're Isabella Martinez, the bravest, most beautiful, most talented woman I know. And if this Thomas can't see that, regardless of his bank account, then he doesn't deserve you." "Does But even as Maria spoke the words of comfort, Isabella couldn't shake the memory of the look in Thomas's eyes when he had spoken of love, or the gentleness in his voice when he had asked her to stay. Had that been real, or just another part of his elaborate performance? Outside, the storm raged on, matching the turmoil in Isabella's heart. Tomorrow night would be their final performance in Silver Creek, and then they would move on to the next town, leaving Thomas Mitchell, whoever he really was, behind forever. The question was whether her heart would ever recover from loving a man who might never have existed at all. The final night of the circus in Silver Creek arrived with an unsettling calm after the previous night's storm. The air was crisp and clean, washed by the rain, and the stars seemed brighter than usual in the clear sky. Isabella prepared for her last performance with a heavy heart, knowing that in a few hours she would leave this place and Thomas forever. She had barely slept, spending the night wrestling with questions that seemed to have no clear answers. Was Thomas's deception unforgivable? Or was it the desperate act of a man who had been judged by his wealth his entire life? Could she trust that his feelings were real when his identity had been a lie? And perhaps most painfully, did any of it matter when their worlds were so impossibly far apart? "You don't have to perform tonight if you're not ready," Senor Rodriguez said gently, approaching Isabella as she stared at her reflection in the small mirror they used for costume preparation. "The people will understand." "No," Isabella said quietly, straightening her shoulders. "The show must go on. That's what you always taught me." But as Isabella stepped onto the platform for what she knew would be her final dance in Silver Creek, she was startled to find Thomas's usual seat empty. She had expected him to be there, had even rehearsed in her mind what it would feel like to perform knowing it was goodbye. The empty chair threw her off balance in a way that surprised her. Fighting back tears, Isabella danced with more passion than she ever had before, pouring all of her heartbreak and confusion into every movement. This wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a farewell to the dream she had allowed herself to believe in, a goodbye to the possibility of love she had thought she'd found. As the music ended and the crowd erupted in their loudest applause yet, Isabella took her bow with tears streaming down her face. The audience, thinking it was part of the performance, cheered even louder, but Isabella barely heard them. All she could see was that empty chair where Thomas should have been. After the show, as the circus performers began their final breakdown of equipment, Isabella wandered outside for one last look at Silver Creek. Tomorrow they would be gone, and this would all become just another memory in a long string of temporary places and temporary feelings. She was so lost in her melancholy thoughts that she almost missed the figure standing by the large oak tree at the edge of town. When she looked more closely, her heart stopped. It was Thomas, but not the Thomas she had known. This man wore a fine black suit with a vest and gold watch chain, polished leather boots, and a hat that clearly cost more than most people in Silver Creek made in a month. He looked every inch the wealthy banker he claimed to be, and seeing him this way made the gulf between them feel even wider. But it was his eyes that made Isabella's breath catch. Gone was the confident, measured look she had seen in their previous encounters. Instead, Thomas looked vulnerable, uncertain, and deeply sad. "I didn't think you'd come," Isabella said as she approached, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure I should," Thomas admitted. "After last night I thought you might not want to see me again, but I couldn't let you leave without trying one more time." They stood several feet apart, the physical distance echoing the emotional chasm that had opened between them. Thomas looked down at his expensive clothes with something like disgust. "This is who I really am, Isabella. This is what I look like when I'm not pretending to be someone else. And I understand if you can't forgive me for lying to you, but I need you to know that everything I told you about my feelings was true." "Your feelings," Isabella repeated, her voice tight with pain. "How can I believe anything you say when you lied about everything else?" Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather journal. "Because I can prove it," he said, offering it to her. "This is my journal, Isabella. I've been writing in it every night since I first saw you dance. Read it, and you'll see that my feelings for you were never a lie." Isabella hesitated, then took the journal. Opening it to a random page, she read, "Tonight I watched Isabella dance again, and I felt something I've never experienced before. When she moves, it's as if she's speaking a language that bypasses the mind and goes straight to the soul. I found myself wishing I could dance with her, not just watch from the shadows. But how could I explain to her that the simple cowboy she thinks she's talking to owns half this county? How could I tell her that I've been looking for someone to love me for who I am, not what I have, when I haven't even been honest about what I have?" Isabella's hands trembled as she read. Flipping to another entry, she found, "Isabella told me tonight about wanting a little house with a garden. She has no idea that I could give her a mansion with gardens that stretch to the horizon, but that's not what she wants. She wants something real, something earned through love rather than bought with money. I've never met anyone like her. She makes me want to be worthy of her dreams, not just able to afford them." Tears were streaming down Isabella's face as she closed the journal and looked up at Thomas. These entries, they're all about finding real love, about being tired of people who only see your money. "I've been wealthy my entire life, Isabella," Thomas said quietly. "Do you know what that means? It means that every woman who has ever shown interest in me, I've had to wonder if she truly cares about me, or if she's just attracted to my bank account. It means that every friendship feels conditional. Every relationship feels like a business transaction." He took a step closer, his voice growing more passionate. "When I met you, for the first time in my life, I knew that a woman was seeing me, just me. The way you looked at me, the way you talked to me. It wasn't about what I could give you, or what I could do for you. You liked the man you thought I was. And that man, that's who I really am underneath all the expectations and responsibilities." But you lied to me," Isabella said, though her voice had lost some of its hardness. "I did," Thomas admitted, "and I was wrong. I was so afraid of being judged by my wealth that I became dishonest, and in doing so, I hurt the one person I never wanted to hurt. I'm sorry, Isabella. I'm sorrier than I know how to express." Isabella looked at the journal in her hands, then back at Thomas's face. "What happens now, Thomas? Even if I can forgive the deception, we're still from completely different worlds. I'm a circus performer with nothing to my name, and you're practically royalty in this territory." "You're wrong," Thomas said firmly. "You have everything to your name that matters. You have talent and strength and kindness and a capacity for joy that I've never seen in anyone else. As for our different worlds, Isabella, I want to build a new world with you." He dropped to one knee right there in the dusty street, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Isabella gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Isabella Martinez," Thomas said, his voice strong despite the tears in his eyes. "I know I have no right to ask this after what I've put you through, but I'm asking anyway. I love you. Not the circus dancer, not the exotic performer, but you, the woman who dreams of gardens and real homes, who dances like she's speaking to the angels, who has shown me what it means to be loved for who I truly am." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, not the flashy display of wealth Isabella might have expected, but something elegant and tasteful that somehow seemed perfect. "Stay in Silver Creek. Marry me. Let me prove to you every day for the rest of our lives that my love for you is real. Let me give you that garden you dreamed about, but more than that, let me give you a partner who will tend it with you, who will build that real home with you." Isabella stared at the ring, then at Thomas's face. Around them, the circus was packing up, preparing to leave Silver Creek and move on to the next town, the next temporary stop in her wandering life. But Thomas was offering her something she had never dared to hope for, not just wealth, but roots, stability, and most importantly, love that felt genuine and deep. "Thomas," she whispered, "how do I know this is real? How do I know you're not just caught up in the romance of the circus, that you won't grow tired of me once the novelty wears off?" Thomas reached up and gently took her hands. "Because I've been wealthy all my life, Isabella, and I've never felt as rich as I do when I'm with you. Because in 3 days, you've taught me more about joy and authenticity than I learned in 28 years before I met you. Because when I imagine my future, I can't see it without you in it." Isabella felt her resolve crumbling. Looking into Thomas's eyes, she saw not the deception that had hurt her, but the vulnerability he had been trying to protect, the loneliness that matched her own, and the love that she was beginning to believe was genuine. "The circus is my family," she said. "I can't just abandon them." "Then don't," Thomas said immediately. "Senor Rodriguez has been talking about wanting to settle down, start a permanent theater. I could help make that happen right here in Silver Creek. The circus could have a home base, and you could still perform, but you'd have roots too. We could build something together, not just for us, but for everyone." Isabella looked over at the circus, where Maria was watching anxiously from beside the wagons. When their eyes met, Maria smiled and nodded encouragingly, as if giving her friend permission to choose happiness. "I'm scared," Isabella admitted, looking back at Thomas. "I've never had anything permanent in my life. What if I don't know how to stay in one place? What if you realize I'm not the lady you need me to be? And I'm scared that I don't know how to love someone without trying to solve their problems with money," Thomas replied. "But maybe we can learn together. Maybe love isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. Maybe it's about finding someone worth being brave for." Isabella looked at the ring again, then at Thomas's face, and finally at the journal in her hands. Tangible proof that his feelings had been real even when his identity was false. Making the biggest leap of faith of her life, she whispered, "Yes." Thomas's face lit up with such joy that Isabella couldn't help but smile through her tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made just for her. "Yes, I'll marry you," Isabella said more firmly, and Thomas leaped to his feet, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around right there in the street. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you, Thomas Mitchell," Isabella said. "All of you. The cowboy and the banker, the man who was afraid to be himself, and the man who was brave enough to ask for forgiveness." "I love you too, Isabella Martinez," Thomas replied, cupping her face in his hands. "My beautiful, talented, brave wife-to-be." As they kissed under the desert stars, Isabella felt something settle in her heart that she had never experienced before. The deep, quiet certainty of home, not a place on the map, but a person to build a life with, someone who saw her truly and loved her completely. Behind them, the circus family cheered and applauded, having gathered to witness this unexpected finale to their stay in Silver Creek. And in the distance, the lights of the town twinkled like earthbound stars, welcoming Isabella to the permanent stage where she would perform the greatest role of her life, not as a dancer, but as a woman in love, building a real home with a man who had learned to be honest about who he truly was. 6 months later, Isabella Martinez Mitchell would indeed have her garden, a beautiful space behind their modest but comfortable home, where wildflowers grew alongside carefully tended vegetables. The Silver Creek Permanent Theater and Circus would be the most popular entertainment venue in 3 territories, giving traveling performers a place to rest and local talent a stage to shine. But most importantly, Isabella would wake up every morning next to a man who loved her for exactly who she was, in a life they had built together on a foundation of truth, forgiveness, and the kind of love that was worth every risk they had taken to find it. In the end, the circus dancer had found her cowboy, and the cowboy had found his home, not in wealth or status, but in the arms of a woman who had taught him that the greatest riches were those that couldn't be bought, only earned through an honest heart and the courage to love without reservation.